The first domino has dropped, and the Steelers offseason is officially here. This is another edition of Mic Drop on Pittsburgh Sports Live, coming at you from the Beaver County Auto Studios up above Market Square here in downtown Pittsburgh. I am Mike Asti, and I'm here to tell you why this is only the beginning of change for the Pittsburgh Steelers. The move you really maybe want made won't be made, obviously, and it's already been made clear, and why this one move should signal one other move that it kind of corresponds with. Joey Porter is gone. Steelers deciding to part ways with Joey Porter. They're on SteelersNow.com, new venture here in the Pittsburgh Sports Now family. Steelers part ways with linebacker coach and former Steeler great Joey Porter, deciding not to renew his contract. Now, that's not exactly incredibly surprising. Joey Porter is kind of an expendable guy, and while I told you a few weeks ago, and I'm going to tell you now, and I've been telling you for really ever, and many of you want to ignore this or just don't want to come to terms with this reality and live in your sense of denial or keep bringing it up for almost a sense of pointlessness, Mike Tomlin's not going to be fired. The Pittsburgh Steelers franchise does not fire head coaches. They allowed Cowher to hang around for years while missing the playoffs. They allowed Chuck Noll to hang around for a decade plus while the Steelers kind of floundered in mediocrity after his dynastic decade in the 70s. They gave those Hall of Fame coaches much room for error and a long rope to kind of rebound things and retool during dark eras of the Pittsburgh Steelers franchise, and they're going to do the same thing for Mike Tomlin, especially after 13 wins a year ago, and this missing the playoffs is unacceptable with that kind of talent, but a coach with his resume not going to be fired, especially not off just 1 year like this. He, though, did make it clear he understands he needs to change and maybe needs to adapt and needs to have a tighter ship, and maybe if that doesn't happen will lead to his contract not being renewed like it wasn't for Joey Porter. But other moves will be made, and part of this change might even be Mike Tomlin himself trying to rule with somewhat of an iron fist now. And this goes to a very stricter tone of his on Wednesday's press conference that I attended. Myself and all of Pittsburgh media really was there. It was a packed house, but he made it clear that not only will he do some self-reflection on himself, but he seemed very frustrated, very irritated, and kind of seemed fed up with Antonio Brown. And we know the antics there, and you can go on my last show to touch on my takes there because they're clear. The Steelers must trade Antonio Brown. They probably won't. They can do it. It won't ruin them in the cap like many of you think, but enough is enough. They must trade Antonio Brown. Now, separate from whether that happens, he made it clear he needs more communication from Antonio Brown. I would not be surprised if this is not now some directive or some at least self-reflection, some come to Jesus meeting with himself. Similar to what happened with Tom Coughlin and the New York Giants. Now, they weren't a franchise. They were an historic franchise as well, but they weren't a franchise that refuses to fire head coaches like the Steelers. But they were a franchise, and Michael Strahan said this, that he was going to retire well before he actually ended up doing so, and they won that Super Bowl over the Patriots because he was fed up with Tom Coughlin, and it was an opposite situation, a much stricter approach that wasn't fun to be around, but he needed to kind of loosen up the ship, and he did, and he was a veteran coach who was kind of set in his ways, but he loosened up the ship, and they were able to get that historic upset Super Bowl championship over the Patriots after the 2007 season, and then even winning another one a few years later after Michael Strahan did retire and having success with the Giants until he eventually was fired, and that still could happen with Tomlin, but there was a period to able to change and have that success off of him changing and realizing that he needed to adapt. Tomlin going to need to do the same thing, but in reverse, and maybe be stricter, not run as loose of a ship, not worry about being friends with the players as much as maybe he has the last 10 years. But with Joey Porter gone, It leads to one thing the Pittsburgh Steelers need to do. The Pittsburgh Steelers probably needed to do last year. And this might even be Mike Tomlin being able to use somebody else as a scapegoat, being able to throw the blame on somebody else, or at least making it clear that change is now. Because while he's not going anywhere and they're not going to fire him, change is necessary with the Pittsburgh Steelers. And that is Keith Butler has to go. Keith Butler has to go. This is a Steelers defense that, while it was without Ryan Shazier for an entire season, and I understand that's a major gap, it's a defense that has been a weakness of this team for 2+ years, if not longer, and certainly under the regime of Keith Butler. While Keith Butler's been there, this has not been a stellar defense, to say the least, and that included time with Ryan Shazier last year before his injury. Even with him being out, it shouldn't catastrophically collapse like this, and somebody from the top down has to be held accountable. This is a Pittsburgh Steelers defense that last year in the playoffs, in the divisional round, they got upset to the Jacksonville Jaguars at home. I was there in the press box. We were all shocked. The fans were shocked. It was kind of a pin drop scenario that you could hear a pin drop in that stadium after that loss. It was that surprising with that team that did complete a successful year with 13 wins in that regular season. However, they lost that game because of the defense. Many blame Todd Haley, and Todd Haley was a scapegoat last year and he got fired, but the Steelers lost that game because of the defense. The defense collapsed in that game. The defense allowed Blake Bortles to run up and down the field and up and down the field, and for the Jacksonville Jaguars offense to have that much success against a Steeler defense that should have been able to deal with Blake Bortles and shouldn't have allowed that to happen in that playoff game. The defense this year didn't force enough takeaways, didn't convert enough turnovers, helping to lead to some of those losses. And the Steelers defense just needs to be better. But a part of this change, this come to Jesus new era of Steeler football, even though Mike Tomlin's still being the head coach, Joey Porter's gone. Okay, that's nice. That's not going to catastrophically change things and create this major improvement off of having a new linebackers coach. That wasn't really surprising for me. But Keith Butler needs to go. Keith Butler needs to be the change that is at the top, since the Rooney family obviously is going to keep on owning this team, and Mike Tomlin's going to keep on being the head coach. Maybe his contract won't be re-upped when that time comes if they don't see an improvement, especially if they miss the playoffs again next year, still with a lot of talent on this team, regardless of what happens with Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell. But that's not going to happen right now. So for going into the 2019 season, they need a new defensive coordinator. They need that change to be there. They need the guy that probably should have had the hook and the axe last year to finally get that this season. I know he's liked around the facility and they're friends with him and they wanted to give him some leeway and latitude. And I know that Todd Haley was an easy scapegoat last year, but Keith Butler needs to go now. And I wouldn't be surprised if it happens. I actually would expect it to happen now. By the time you consume this, it may occur, actually. He's probably going to be a guy to go. But the Steelers defensively need that change with a new coordinator. They need somebody to fit more into who is there personnel-wise. They need to realize Ryan Shazier is not going to be back. And they need to retool that defense through the draft. And since they're probably not going to bring anybody in free agency-wise, they need a new coordinator that can adapt more on the fly, that can get a system that maybe can fit the actual personnel. Doesn't have to be 1970s Steeler football any longer. And Keith Butler just needs to go. That even leads you to who maybe could replace him as defensive coordinator, because that brings up, maybe, do you want a young guy? Do you want a young unknown guy to maybe get into that job and ascend to that job? Or how would you feel about a Marvin Lewis? Now, I'm sure that might not be popular with everybody due to the recent history of the Steelers-Bengals rivalry, due to recent comments defending Vontaze Burfict, etc., and Pac-Man Jones, even going back to being a coordinator for the 2000 Ravens defense when they won a Super Bowl, and that was in the height of the Steelers-Ravens rivalry of that time. I get it. He's been all over the AFC North except Cleveland. He's been a rival and a thorn in the Steelers' side for years. However, while he's not been a wildly successful head coach, at least he hasn't won in the playoffs. He is 0 for 7 playoff trips with the Bengals and 0 playoff victories. And while I certainly agree he should have got fired years ago, and it was amazing that the Bengals kept on keeping him around and he basically was able to linger regardless of the product. And this year, maybe you don't blame him due to the injuries to Andy Dalton and A.J. Green, but he was on borrowed time. And eventually there had to be a parting of the ways with him and the Cincinnati Bengals. They had to want more and he just had to go. He's one of the most successful defensive coordinators in league history. He coordinated the greatest defense in league history, arguably one of them for sure. His defenses are not usually the problem. Even when that team doesn't win, it's not like the defense usually is the main issue with the Cincinnati Bengals. The defense hadn't been the problem in those playoff games in which they weren't able to win a playoff game out of those 7 trips. And just because he might not be head coach material, or might be a guy that should have got fired years ago as a head coach, is not to say he wasn't successful at all. He did lead a Bengals franchise to rise from the ashes of crap. They had 12 straight years of missing the playoffs before he got there. He took them into the greatest heights of that franchise in 20-plus years and easily the second greatest head coach in that franchise's history behind what went on there in the 80s with the 2 Super Bowl appearances. But since then, they were nothing in the 90s. They were nothing in the early 2000s. He got there and took them to at least division titles, to playoff appearances. They would lose to teams like the Steelers in the playoffs, and they would certainly play some helter-skelter play with the penalties and with the referees, and it would certainly hurt them overall, and maybe he shouldn't be the head man anymore. But as far as the defensive coordinator, as far as a guy that maybe could really come in there with an iron fist and run that defense, a guy that would garner respect by those players on that defense, and there are still some veterans there, Cam Hayward in particular, that he could be a guy that absolutely could be utilized. As you just see Dan walking by there, that's okay. Dan Kongursky, Pittsburgh Hockey Now. I will give him a plug there on our venture, Pittsburgh Hockey Now. No worries there, Dan. I know he's on a little bit of a time crunch, and I wasn't going to mail that MacBook to him. So, Dan, Pittsburgh Hockey Now, covering the Penguins for one of our many outlets there in our family of networks, but not going to get me too off track. Marvin Lewis could be a guy that, to be honest with you, should get a look. I don't think it'd be ridiculous. I could see him being welcomed here. I don't think Mike Tomlin would be against. He doesn't care about rivalries and divisional matchups and things like that. So Marvin Lewis is the guy that could come in. But regardless of that, Keith Butler has to go. Keith Butler has to go. And the Steelers' changes need to even be more profound. And that is where you can get a profound change. Getting rid of Keith Butler and maybe bringing in a Marvin Lewis, and I know he's not young, but it's not impossible to have retreads have success. A coordinator of his caliber, just because he didn't get it done as a head coach and got fired as a head coach, doesn't mean cannot have success and really help this Pittsburgh Steelers defense and really get a weak part of this team potentially fixed and knowing he can get the most out of that defense. We saw that with the Bengals even when they weren't able to get a playoff victory. So Joey Porter, gone. The Steelers part ways with the Steeler great, former player, Super Bowl champion, and assistant head coach, or assistant coach, not assistant head coach, but an assistant coach, linebacker coach with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Keith Butler could be a change, and Keith Butler needs to be another change. He needs to go, and I wouldn't be against Marvin Lewis being a guy to bring in. Now, separate from those moves, just as we round things out, just a little aside almost, but it's going to hit more news, and we'll do shows on it next week. And as the days go by here in the Steelers' off season, that is its own drama. Not going to ever touch the drama of the regular season, but when your team does loses and disappoints, and you have drama and divas, the off season's almost as fun. Mike Munchak, though, interview for the Broncos job. Contact made by the Jets, contact made by the Packers, by the Dolphins, even the Cleveland Browns, all with interest in Mike Munchak. And interest was there last year even. So, yes, it'll be a devastating loss to lose him, but it's surprising they even have him at this point. They should have lost him a year ago. It's astounding they were even able to keep him as long as they have. So, yes, he's done wonders with the Steelers line. He's done wonders with that facet of the Steelers team, and that's one of the rare spots that was not a weak issue or did not disappoint this past season. And that's why he's garnering so much interest. But it's almost a guarantee he's going to be gone. So that's not a change that they're making by firing somebody or not renewing a contract. He's going to be gone by he's going to get a promotion to be a head coach or be a head coach in waiting or get some high-level situation somewhere, get some more money. If not, he's going to get more money here. But Mike Munchak getting interviewed by the Broncos, getting asked to be spoken to by other franchises. I'm sure he'll get other interviews, and Mike Munchak is going to be a guy that is going to be gone. He's going to be a guy that's going to be part of this change, for better or worse, and that is going to be one of the devastating parts. That's going to be one of the guys that you wish you could have kept. But think of it this way, Steeler fans. He should have been gone a year ago. They were able to keep him 1 year longer. He worked out. He did his job. It wasn't enough for the overall team, obviously, but he was almost on borrowed time with the Steelers anyway. So he's a guy that's going to be gone and be part of that change as well. Now, as we close this chapter on this is only the first of many, there's going to be more of these off-season gems, especially with our new site out there, SteelersNow.com. Find us on Twitter at PGHSteelersNow on Twitter. Find us for the website, SteelersNow.com. We all know about PittsburghSportsNow.com. We know about PittsburghSoccerNow.com even. And as I plug Dan as he came in here to bust in and get his laptop to do his work for PittsburghHockeyNow.com. So you get all of those outlets churning content here on Pittsburgh Sports Live. You get Dan's live Penguin chats. You're going to get Mic Drop, whether you like it or not. You're going to get the Radio Gold that is my program here with Mic Drop, and it's mostly been Steelers. I've dabbled in Penguins and Pirates. It's going to be whatever the Pittsburgh sports news of the day, really, the spirit moves me, but especially with Steelers Now launching, and especially with the drama around the Steelers into their offseason and going into the draft, and then more drama there and so much news still ready to erupt off of the change that Tomlin has promised all of us, and a little present under our tree after Christmas and after the holiday for the new year. Expect a lot of Steelers shows as well. So to get that content easily accessible to you, there it is on the screen. There it is. Click on the subscribe button. Support Pittsburgh Sports Live. Easy. Subscribe on the YouTube. Here's another one for you. Pittsburgh Sports Live on YouTube. So just search it in YouTube and then click on the subscribe button. Also, find us, Pittsburgh Sports Live, on Twitter at PGH Sports Live on Twitter. Change is near. Change is here, actually, for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Joey Porter out as linebackers coach, so they part ways with the Steelers great, and despite any mixed feelings, he is gone. Keith Butler needs to go. He needs to be a guy that goes. He got to get the blame now. He got another year after last year. It needs to be his time now. I would be fine with Marvin Lewis being the next defensive coordinator. That would be a nice little situation with two head coaching type of guys, with a head coach experience type of guy with a ring on his finger from coordinating a legendary defense to really come in here. If you want to be part of the Iron Fist mentality now, Mike Tomlin, I think Marvin Lewis is who you bring in. I understand he ran a loose ship as a head coach with the Bengals, but you need to bring guys in with resumes, with credentials, who are going to have cachet and clout and can help you rule with that iron fist and are going to garner respect in that locker room. Not guys getting paid nothing for their job, that are younger, that are inexperienced, that aren't known, and these players think they can run over. That won't be a Marvin Lewis. That maybe won't be the new Mike Tomlin if we really get that. Wrestling fans, the new Daniel Bryan. Will we now get the new Mike Tomlin as head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers? But either way, change is here. And if you'd rather have somebody else, if you think Marvin Lewis is just a crazy thought, if you want to somehow keep Keith Butler, if you don't think he should have got any blame off of last year and it was all about Haley as he was the one fired, or if you just want to really air any of your grievances, feel free to drop a line there in the comments of this video or tweet me at MikeAsti11. So the conquering is over. Steelers didn't conquer this year at all, and now it's going to be about righting the ship and moving that conquering into change. So you need change, and then you'll get conquering, or at least more conquering, for the Pittsburgh Steelers. This has been another edition of Mic Drop here on Pittsburgh Sports Live, coming at you from the Beaver County Auto Studios up above Market Square here in downtown Pittsburgh. I am out.